So, hello, my fellow career besties. I'm not making this video out of a sense of I know everything or I'm trying to tell you what to do within your career. This is just the information that I wish I had when I was younger. And when I was seeking out this kind of information, I remember the frustration of being a teenager or being early within my LLB, so first and second year, and just being placated by the adults around me where they said, "Ah, no, you're so young, you still got time to figure out what you're going to do within your career." And I don't necessarily think that this is bad advice, but I did feel like I was being belittled and I was being patted on the head and being told, just wait until you're older. And that was very frustrating to me because I always wanted to make an impact within society. I was extremely driven. I wanted to volunteer, I wanted to be out there, but I was just being handcuffed, or at least that's what it felt like. And I wanted to hear this from the perspective of someone who had lived a human rights law career, because that's the person who can give the most authentic advice, tell you the good and the bad and the ugly. Whereas someone talking from a purely theoretical perspective is obviously always going to have blind spots. So, again, this is just my experience. I'm just a human, I'm flawed, I've got my issues, but that's what I wanted to portray because that's what I feel will be helpful to people. And then the other reality is within my personal and professional life, people are very curious about my weird, wonderful, and winding career path. And so I thought if I'm comfortable enough with these people, maybe I can just send them this video and then I don't have to keep repeating myself. So, when we talk about career, I think it is relevant to look relatively young and to begin that search from quite young. So when I was about 10 or 11 years old, that's when I was already getting career advice. If we take a snapshot of me, academically, I did very well, but I didn't have to work. So I would rush through my work and then just read or play outside or watch TV. And a lot of boys are allowed to brag about this. They're allowed to say, no, I was lazy academically and I don't try, and they laugh, and that's it. Whereas when you're a woman or a girl, you're told to just shut up and be humble. So that is something socially that I battled with. There was a lot, it attracted a lot of envy from so called friends, and so I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, and that was one of the downsides. People would make snide comments, bully, belittle, boys and girls. So there was a sense of isolation, definitely. But I mean, doing well academically without having to work, I mean, the benefit is you've got a lot of free time, which I would use to read. So a lot of older people would look at me and say, okay, you've got the EQ, you've got the IQ, therefore you should become a medical doctor. If we unpack this advice, and we need to give some context to this advice, it's not bad, it's just incomplete advice. IQ, you have to do very well academically to even get into medicine and to stay in medicine. It's obviously a long study process to get in, and then and to study the 6 years. And then the aspect of EQ, this was told to me by people within the medical profession because they said no. A lot of doctors, you have to teach them bedside manner. That's one thing that's very often trained in the continuing professional development, because a lot of doctors lack compassion, empathy, etc. And this was told to me by people in the medical profession, which is fair enough, which again I don't think it's necessarily bad advice. However, at 10 or 11 years old, I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think to be a medical doctor, you also have to have somewhat of a love of science. You don't necessarily need to be obsessed, but you need to enjoy science because that's going to be your career. And that's the place where you're going to be seeing developments. So the thing is that at 10 years old, I actually loved like every subject that I studied. I didn't have any particular leaning towards anything. I didn't have any work ethic because, again, I did well naturally. So I had my National Geographic Kids subscription and the posters splashed across my bedroom walls. I did enjoy science. So it was very difficult for me to pinpoint what I wanted to do. A lot of other students, it was easier for them to say, this is where my limits are, this is where my edges are. They had that self awareness from younger because they struggled. And I think it built that character within them and that self awareness, which I just didn't have because I was so malleable. I was very much like malleable Play Doh, and I was just this mush that could still be molded by other people's opinions and swayed by other people's opinions. So, again, I'm just giving you a full picture here. I'm not trying to brag or anything like that. There's always upsides and downsides to everything. So, we can fast forward now from grade 4, 5 to grade 9, where you're supposed to select your subjects. So within South Africa, you select three electives and then you've obviously got your mandatory subjects. Within the UK, I know it's GCSEs and they move to A levels. And within the US, you can take high school electives that can even count towards your bachelor's degree if they are AP classes, which I think is fantastic, but we don't have that option in South Africa. So it was difficult for me to choose subjects and choose a specialty because I did very well at history, at geography, at a lot of the things. Obviously, every high school can't offer everything. I went to a public school and they didn't have information technology as a full-time subject. You could take it as an extra subject, which I did. I took information technology for a year and then abandoned it. So yes, I did information technology for an extra subject for a year and then decided to drop it because there were a lot of logistical issues. Initially it was offered at my school in grade 10, but then in grade 11 we had to find transport to another school, and then the IT teacher would often be 3 hours late, and it was wasting a lot of our time and energy and transport and that kind of thing. So it was just not possible for me to continue, and I opted to leave it because I didn't really even like it anyway. And when I was in high school and when I was choosing my specialties, I sort of fell into a science track because again the advice that people were giving was not necessarily I think it was well meaning, but it was not necessarily complete. So a lot of our teachers would say, don't take mathematical literacy unless you absolutely have to, because mathematical literacy obviously limits you in the degrees that you can choose and in the career tracks that you can choose. So again, I don't think it's necessarily bad advice. I did very well at maths. Um, One joke that a lot of people would tell is, oh, I'm going into law because I'm shit at maths. And that was just not a reality for me. So, I mean, it's obviously a flippant joke, but it I'm just telling you this so that you can see why it was difficult for me to really know where I fit and where I didn't. So I fell into a science track. I wasn't really a fan of physics. I enjoyed chemistry, but not necessarily physics. And biological life sciences, I did quite well. But I was essentially told by teachers and things, oh, you are lazy. Like, this is the grades that you're getting when you don't try in physical science. So imagine if you did try what you would get. But the reality was it was not necessarily something that I saw myself in. I was being pushed and shoveled into the health sciences, but it didn't feel right for me. So I shadowed an occupational therapist, I had shadowed pharmacists, I had seen what medical doctors did on a day to day basis. I also volunteered at children's homes, elderly homes. I'm trying to think of all of the things that I did. I shadowed working in a bookshop, I worked in school libraries, I did school leadership because I just felt there's a lot that you can learn from leadership, the social skills, where you fit, where you don't. So again, I just think that those are important things to do if you have the capacity for that. The other thing I was going to mention a couple of things. So, in terms of unemployment within South Africa, a lot of teachers, again, I think this is very well meaning, but they would say if you are inclined towards science, do science because mathematics and the physical sciences are scarce skills within South Africa. So, yes and no, you do get a lot of engineers or medical doctors who are sitting unemployed within South Africa for various political and economic reasons, etc. So, I'm just saying that science is not the be all and end all. It's not going to guarantee, there are no guarantees in life. And I think in South Africa, there's this view that a BA, a Bachelor of Arts degree, is a BA, a bugger all degree. And I think that's quite a small minded way of thinking. I think it's a very limited way of thinking. So that is something that was pushed on me. Oh, just do the sciences because that's the only way to career stability. And that's not the case. So this very maybe small-minded thinking was more familial pressure, and the teachers at my school and the educational professionals had maybe a bit more of a balanced view. So one of my debating coaches, I kind of dipped in and out of debating, but one of them said, you think really well on your feet. You can look at an issue from a lot of different angles and from a problem solving angle, and therefore, and she just kind of hinted that I would be very good at litigation and at law. But I felt like a fraud because, so at this point, I was 14 when I was told this advice. I felt like a fraud because I wasn't one of those people where I knew I wanted to do law and that was it. There were so many people where from the day they were born almost it feels like they knew what they wanted to do, and I just wasn't that person. I'm quite malleable, I'm quite adaptable. As a teenager I saw that as a weakness because the, I wanted to know, I wanted to be certain, I wanted to be on a certain track towards something and have this drive and have this momentum and this work ethic, but I just didn't have that. But now that I'm older, I do see it as more of a strength because the world is always changing. We've got artificial intelligence now. Tomorrow there's going to be careers that we don't even have now, that we've never even thought of could be a career. So as the world changes and adapts, you have to change and adapt within your career. It's I'm not like social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, but adaptation to change is an important characteristic to have as a human being. So if you don't know exactly what you want to do career wise and you're not fixated on something career wise, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, so on the career advice that I was given this litigation, or you should do litigation. There was also an educational psychologist who visited our school. We did aptitude tests, and she really pointed out law because she herself had started in law and she saw some characteristics within me. She also said that being bilingual, English and Afrikaans, could be an advantage. So I did not learn Afrikaans growing up. I didn't have any exposure to it except in school, but I just took to it and I have that linguistic learning ability. Some people will just insist that they don't have the ability and it's an innate ability. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think for a lot of people, language learning is a necessity and you just have to do it. So to say that you don't have the ability to learn languages is just a privilege and you're just lazy. But anyway, um, that aside. Yeah, I was told that by an educational psychologist. On my aptitude test, there were a lot of different things that came up. She said to me that it seems like the caring professions are being pushed onto me, and it's not necessarily what I would be drawn to and good at. She also pointed out journalism as being something that could suit me, which I think possibly yes. For journalism, you have to be quite incisive and, so to speak, see through the bullshit. You have to be quite forward, quite assertive, and I think that's important. So you can't be this wallflower who's waiting for things to happen. And I think if anyone has seen the show Gilmore Girls, you'll know the protagonist Rory Gilmore was too passive for journalism. She would often say that she wanted to do that and become Christiane Amanpour, but she was too passive. So I think you have to work with your natural temperament. You will have natural strengths, and obviously these things that you can build. So going on this health sciences track, I was essentially shoveled into it and fell into a pharmacy degree at the University of the Witwatersrand. And it's something where I do carry a bit of guilt about it because it is highly coveted as a degree. It's highly coveted as a university. However, it was simply not my path, unfortunately. Especially through the work experience, I found it to be very repetitive. The more hours that I worked within a pharmacy, I would just see and I would get this tightness in my chest as I thought about the next 40 years of my career. I couldn't waste away, waste my life in that sense. For me, it would feel like a waste of life. Obviously, for some people, that would be an ideal career, and it's not my intention to disparage that. But eventually, I moved out of pharmacy. I don't think those 3 years were wasted, however, because within my first year we did sociology and we learned about the biopsychosocial environmental model, where we talked about how the biomedical model is insufficient when you look at it alone. You might have a patient who has tuberculosis and you give him the medication and you think that that's going to solve it, but he has tuberculosis because he works in the mines or because of spatial apartheid and he's situated next to a fossil fuel industry or whatever the case may be. And so we have to look at these sociological issues and historical issues as to why there are poor health outcomes, especially within lower socioeconomic groups. So that for me was fascinating, and that's when I knew I was exactly in the right place when I was learning sociology. And I was in various student societies. So Inala Society was an on campus vegetable garden for students who were on food subsidies. They would have things like maize meal and the staples, but nothing, no fresh produce. And so not only did we plant that produce, but there was also a lot of leftist theory, which that was when I figured out that it was where I belong. So this was between the years of 19 to 21 years old. Again, working in pharmacies, and then we also had an assignment where we had to audit the pharmacy based on the Pharmacy Act checklist. And you had to check off, does this place have a fire extinguisher? Is there a thermometer? Is medication stored off the floor? how is the shelving system, etc., all of these things. And it really opened my eyes into the power of legislation, the power of public policy, and how it can regulate on a macroscopic level. Legislation is obviously never perfect, it's never infallible, but it can have a lot of power to set minimum standards that would not otherwise be there. And that's what really made me pivot into law at the age of like 21 or 22. It felt like the end of the world to be pivoting at that age, but I don't know. Now I look back at it and I think, I was so young and I really knew my own mind. I knew myself. I knew what would work. I knew what wouldn't work. I didn't sit in a career for, endless amounts of time and only pivot later. So it did feel like the end of the world. But when I went into my first year of law, it was 2020 and it was the COVID lockdown. So that obviously made it difficult in terms of work experience. Work experience is something that I think to be very important within any career, whatever career that you're within, because that's how you get to know yourself. The other reality is when employers look on paper at an LLB graduate, everybody has an LLB. You doing well academically, okay, you might be good with the books, but practically, can you execute things? Or you do all of these short courses online, as an employer, I don't know that it necessarily adds anything that a degree doesn't add. So within my law degree, I found it to be very important that I do outreach and I volunteer within the bounds of reality, because obviously 2020 and 2021 was hard lockdown. 2022, I experienced a natural disaster and difficulties with accommodation and things like that. So it was very logistically difficult to do any volunteering, to get any work experience. But somehow, within my last 2 years of my law degree, I did that. I worked in my university library, I worked in a committee, I worked within various NGOs. There's one environmental NGO which is like clean up, insert town name, or keep insert town name beautiful. So it was literally you just go around your neighborhood and pick up litter. This is obviously for property value, but it's also because of the environmental impact. So that was just something that was available to me. So I volunteered doing that. I volunteered at a church charity shop because that was something very close by to me and something that I could realistically commit to doing over a steady period of time. So I did that kind of volunteering, and I just wanted to be out there and involved within my community. The other thing that I also did was volunteered at two law clinics. So the one was run by my university and the other one was probono.org. And that's actually where I ended up getting my articles of clerkship, so my job after graduation. When I was looking to apply as an LLB student, the people that come to the university career fairs and the firms that do that are the larger firms, because they have the capacity to do that. They might have an entire HR department, hiring department, communications and media department, that kind of thing. So you get a lot of graduates going into the big five law firms, no interest in commercial law whatsoever. They just want their articles, but they don't really know what they want to do. And so those firms don't really take those students because it's clear you don't know what you want to do. You're not really defined yet. And I don't think, again, there's anything necessarily wrong with not being defined yet. But don't put everything on the big five firms. I would say literally go and cold call firms, Google firms, and email them and ask them if they have capacity for candidate attorneys. I know someone personally who did that. She was a UNISA graduate, and so obviously with UNISA it's correspondence, so you don't have connections with your lecturers or anything like that who can refer you or give you suggestions. So she cold called, and that's how she got the job where she was working with me as my colleague. The jobs that I wanted to work as a law clerk within the Constitutional Court, because within my first year, I read Constitutional Court judgments and was just enchanted by the sophisticated legal reasoning. And it was fascinating to me, but I didn't get into that law clerk position straight out of university, and it felt like a disappointment for me. I really wanted to also work within government and see the courts and the system from within, because legally we have a very progressive legislation, a very progressive constitution. However, there are obviously gaps in practice, and I wanted to look at the legislation, look at the gaps, and work within policy development. That comes from my pharmacy background and seeing the Pharmacy Act. So again, I kind of saw myself in policy development, but I knew that it would be a bit of a long road, and that also with policy development, academia, legal research, these kinds of investigative aspects of law, it is very beneficial to have a master's degree in law, LLM. However, I thought that doing that straight out of my LLB would be unwise, because you would be overqualified but underexperienced for most entry level roles, so like a candidate attorney. And that was really my concern. My concern was also financial. I did really feel the need to be earning an income at that point in time. Part of that might be because I had done another degree prior, for various reasons. So when I was applying outward as a law student, I was looking at the big firms, but firstly, I was not really interested in commercial law, and secondly, their social justice departments, so environmental law department and pro bono department and that kind of thing, I didn't have experience in that. So again, I didn't necessarily think I was a good fit for the giant commercial law firms. I applied to things like NGOs, but they often don't have candidate attorney posts, so it doesn't assist you in getting admitted as an attorney, and that is an important aspect. Whether you practice as an attorney or not, it is important to become admitted, even if you want to work within the social justice sector, because if you ever want to litigate one day, you need to have that option. So it was a bit difficult for me looking at NGOs. They were not necessarily hiring, they had quite a low turnover, which is a good thing, but it's a bad thing when you're applying, you know. You want there to be a vacancy. Yeah, so the larger firms were not really working. The NGOs and government, I wasn't really hearing back. And then I got into this firm that I got into because of my volunteering. I just got on well with the attorney. I applied to her firm, they happened to have a vacancy, bam, that was my job. So straight after graduation, straight after being an LLB student, I wasn't unemployed for even 1 minute. So there were a lot of emotions going on at this point in time, because I was very fortunate to get a job straight after graduation within my field, to not wait even for 5 minutes. However, I did feel disappointment because it was not exactly what I wanted to do. This was more of a commercial law firm. It was more wills and estates, conveyancing, crash and bash, divorces, general litigation, like that kind of thing, commercial litigation. And it was just not what I saw my future career trajectory going in that direction. I obviously don't mean any disrespect to that particular firm or to anyone who sees themselves in that, but I didn't really see myself within that. The other option for people who want to do human rights law is to apply straight after graduation to work in legal aid, because they pay very well. So Legal Aid South Africa, it's paid for by the taxpayers, and it's for anybody who can't afford legal representation. There's obviously an income and assets threshold, and there's certain parameters that legal aid does and does not do. So they do certain criminal matters, they do certain civil matters, but they have to obviously define their borders and their boundaries of things that they don't do as well. So legal aid was a possibility. However, you have to have your degree in hand, and it essentially meant that I would have to wait 3 months after getting my LLB. So you apply and you wait, and for me that waiting just felt unbearable. When I was in my degree, I wanted to know and I wanted to have a guarantee that I would have employment straight after graduation. And again, I was very fortunate. Some of my colleagues waited for a year. They were unemployed for quite a long time after they graduated from their degrees. So I was very fortunate to get a job. However, I was not entirely satisfied. You know, many things can be true at once. And when I was at that job, I saved a lot of money. That was not necessarily, it's not really possible to save money in certain socioeconomic circumstances for certain people. However, for me, I also had saved money from working as a librarian within my university. I had saved a lot. And part of this was because your articles of clerkship within South Africa is a fixed term, non renewable contract. Afterwards, there's no guarantee of retention. And I mean, even if I was going to be retained, I knew that that was not my long term trajectory. I really wanted to be in human rights and in social justice. However, so even when I was within my articles, I applied a lot. I applied to over 100 jobs. I applied mostly to government because I wanted to work within the system and just see the lived reality and the experiences and sort of the cracks within the machine, if you can put it that way. I got shortlisted for a government post, but then just ghosted. So, straight after my articles of clerkship, so at this point I had LLB plus 2 years experience, hadn't heard back from anyone. So, my plan was do TEFL, teaching English as a foreign language, and that's a sort of diploma thing. And then that would be my way to earn an income while I waited for not necessarily the perfect career, but something within human rights, something within social justice. And I faced very similar problems when I was applying outwards with my articles. That a lot of NGOs were not necessarily hiring, didn't have a large turnover, and obviously they're looking for experience. So if you are LLB plus 2 years of litigation experience, you're sort of pigeonholed into that trajectory unless you can show a demonstrable interest otherwise. So I decided to volunteer at Lawyers for Human Rights, and that's where I currently am now. It's very difficult to get within the human rights space because a lot of them, especially for paid positions, they insist that you must have experience. But how do you get experience? That's really the question. And I think, I had experience within a church charity shop. I had lots and lots and lots of volunteering experience. But I think just looking at my CV from a third perspective, it's maybe not specific enough experience. It's social justice, and then there's litigation within the private sector separately. So within my current role, I'm trying to bring it together, to bring the social justice and the law together. And again, currently I'm volunteering. It's not a paid position. As much as that is regrettable, I think it would be more regrettable to be sitting at home unemployed and, for goodness knows how long. TEFL as well, the difficulty with that is it's not law related, so it wouldn't be relevant experience on my CV. So, yeah, I will just say that a career within human rights law, you have to show an interest in it somehow. And I think the most obvious and the easiest way to do that is to volunteer. There's things like the United Nations where it can be a bit prohibitive in many ways because a lot of these roles expect you to have a vehicle, expect you to have a working laptop, and that's just not economically possible for a lot of people. There's an organization called CROW within Durban, South Africa, and essentially people pay to volunteer there. They pay to get experience there. So it's difficult, but I would argue that within the commercial space, it's very much the same thing. People really glow about vacation work. They say during the university vacations, they go to the firms and they work there and they shadow and that kind of thing. Vacation work is not paid. You have to find your own transport there and that kind of thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with vacation work within a commercial sense, but if people understand that you need some shadowing and you need some experience that will be unpaid, if people can understand that within a commercial situation, then you can surely understand that within a human rights situation as well. You have to somehow show commitment to the career trajectory that you want to get into, and how do you show that commitment? So again, I think doing a lot of the free human rights courses online, and I don't know that it's sufficient commitment to convince an employer, really. The other thing is an LLM. So doing a Master of Law degree, I think doing it straight out of my LLB was just not something that I wanted to do. I didn't want to be overqualified and underexperienced. And the reality is that a lot of the LLM degrees do feel a bit generalized for me. So, LLM human rights, what is human rights? Human rights is everything. Human rights touches every aspect of law. And again, I did feel that it is a bit generalized for my purposes because I want to specifically go into policy. So there's a lot of options. There's LLM human rights, there's LLM environmental law, Master of Arts in Public Policy. There's a lot of these different things, but I haven't really honed in on a discipline just yet. Currently, I think I might be leaning towards a Master of Arts in International Law because my organization has a lot of international funding from USAID and United Nations and that kind of thing. So I currently work within the United Nations under that banner, UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And International relations is particularly relevant within this field and within the banner that I'm working under. The other thing is that when I was doing my LLB degree, my best subject was international law, street law as well. So that was regarding presenting the law to non-lawyers. So I can obviously do a part two to this video and describe more about career and that kind of thing, but this is just to give you a brief overview of how I came to be where I currently am. So I hope that you found this useful and we can chat about this more later, but currently my voice is going slightly.